Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. We're on episode 7 of My Hero Academia season 5, and they just titled it Match 3. Like they're not even like trying to have like another title to it. So, this series so far has been really interesting for the season. It's been very low key. I've heard some people on Crunchyroll and Twitter and stuff saying, "Oh, these episodes are kind of and stuff," but honestly, I think that it's nice that we have some kind of downtime with these characters, like showing how they've improved and grown over the past several seasons. Because last season with season 4 and Overhaul, we didn't really get that. We got that with Kirishima, and we got that with Deku, obviously, and we got that with Ochako and Suyu to an extent, but we didn't really see the full Class 1A expanded upon. It was mainly those 3 or 4 characters that experienced that fight with Overhaul, and they definitely grew, but we didn't really get to see a whole lot with the others except for like the licensing exam. So I'm totally fine with them showing us what Class 1A and Class 1B can do and how they've grown. I'm totally fine with that. Having some like very similar to season 2 episodes in here. And yeah, they've been very tightly paced. And I will admit, last episode and I think maybe episode 3, one of those earlier episodes, there's a lot of recap, so I can understand people's frustration with that because it is a lot of like going over stuff we've already seen. So I'm curious with this episode if we get something different, if we go right into the match and there's not much recap and it's just building all that up. I'm curious because it's Shoto's team going next, right? So that will be interesting, especially with Ida. So the good thing about My Hero Academia coming out is it comes out in the morning. And I like wake up and I'm like, okay, it's time to watch My Hero Academia. Sometimes that doesn't work out, but today I was like, I'm waking up, I'm watching My Hero. It's gonna be a good day. So, with that being said, let's dive into episode 7. We're over halfway through the first cour. We're like a fourth of the way into the season already, which is exciting. But let's get into episode 7 here, and we're gonna start this here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Okay. This episode had a lot of really interesting one-liners and kind of setup moments that I think they're using to set up future chapters. And as I've talked about this in the spoiler discussion a little bit, so it's not really a spoiler though. I've read the manga, but I have not gone back and reread the manga recently. Like I know the recent chapters, I'm familiar with those, but this has been, right now the manga's on chapter 311, and so this is like 100 chapters before. So I can't remember everything that's happened in this match. I remember some parts, but not all of it. So it's nice watching this animated without having read the manga beforehand because I'm like, oh yeah, cool, this part. And then I'll go back and read the manga for the spoiler discussion for these videos, and it's a neat little reminder of things that have happened. But there's a lot of one-liners and parallels and setup in this episode that I think are really interesting. So I think that it's important that we have the parallel and the contrast. I guess contrast is a better word. There's a lot of contrasting elements in this episode that I think are interesting and we need to note. The first thing is the idea of collateral damage. This match between Momo's group and Class 1B, I guess Kendo's group, Comic Man left a lot of damage in that city. He basically destroyed half of it, and Aizawa even comments, he's like, y'all kind of went overboard with this. So they had to move locations. And I think that's an interesting contrast because you have these kids in high school that probably are not thinking about collateral damage. They're just trying to win the battle. And then you cut to Endeavor doing actual hero work and rescues the kids and gets the villain, causing very little collateral damage. And they even note that in the episode. The police are like, oh, there wasn't much damage at all, because Endeavor's like, is everything okay? And when you think about it, Endeavor's quirk is very destructive. So the fact that he can get the job done as a hero without causing a lot of collateral damage, I think speaks volumes to the maturity of him as a hero versus these kids in high school and their maturity as a hero, because these kids aren't thinking about that aspect of this, even though Aizawa and Vlad are kind of talking about it. They're not thinking about that in the moment, whereas Endeavor is constantly thinking about that as a hero. So I think that's a cool contrast. That's a good one there. The next contrast that kind of pokes itself out is the idea of Tokiyami when he stops Shoto and he's like, hey, I lost this battle and it looked bad because I was trained by Hawks. You were trained by your father, right? So, you need to make sure to take one for Class 1A and help us win, because that'll look good in Endeavor's eyes. And in Tokiyami's vision, he sees, Endeavor and Hawks are the number 1 and number 2 heroes. So he's like, oh, you guys, we need to uphold the honor of these number 1 and number 2 heroes. Isn't that great, Shoto? And Tokiyami thinks that Shoto being raised by Endeavor is a good thing, because nobody knows Endeavor's abusive past. But in Shoto's eyes, he doesn't get that Tokiyami is viewing it in that way. Shoto immediately goes to the flashback of his dad beating the tar out of him, training him, and has a very different perspective of that training than Tokiyami does. So that was an interesting contrast too. And yeah, Shoto does not show his emotions very much. So the fact that Ida picked up on that, and I like the contrast too. Another contrast is that Ida and Shoto are both very intricately tied to their family. I would think out of all of the heroes we have, Deku and Inko are very close. Deku has a really good relationship with his mom. But of all the characters we've had in this show so far for Class 1A, the ones that I would consider to be most tied to their families are Ida and Shoto. Shoto, he's tied to his family with some negative connotation. His family doesn't exactly give him the warm fuzzies when he thinks about them. Fuyumi and Natsu and Rei, obviously, but Endeavor's the big sour spot there. But with Ida, his family is very important to him, and he nearly lost his brother. And he's kind of, if you think about it, Ida and Shoto are kind of representing, the opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of legacy and inheritance, right? Shoto, or Ida, for example, took on his brother's hero name, is continuing that legacy. So he's very closely tied to it, and he wants to be. He wants to prove that Ingenium is a name that will be, incite goodwill and be something that people look to positively as a hero. Whereas Shoto wants to distance himself from his father's legacy as much as possible. He doesn't have a hero name. He's just Shoto. So there's a total opposite connotation there. And I like that we get talk of Toya, which is one of Shoto's brothers that we've not really seen anything about. And Endeavor saying, Toya had my firepower but was weak like Rei. So he could not live up to my legacy, but you can. And so there's all these, I love just the parallels and the contrast in this episode. There's so many that have been put out here for us to think about, and Horikoshi does a really good job of that, of giving us these contrasting elements. And it's like, okay, what does that mean for these characters? Another contrasting element is the whole thing with Bakugo. I love that Bakugo just calls him out. He's like, hey, for somebody trying to keep a secret, y'all are doing a pitiful job. He's like, you're supposed to be keeping one for all a secret. You guys are just out here talking in secret, like everybody can see. And even Mina and Ochaku and Mineta pick up on it. And Endeavor and Deku are like, oh yeah, we're not really the best at being stealthy about this sort of thing. But I do like that Endeavor points out that this is Bakugo's special way of saying that he cares. Bakugo is not very attuned to his emotions and communicating them. So him telling Deku, get stronger so I can beat you up, it's a symbol of love. It's a sign of love, right? And Endeavor's like, sure it is. So I like that contrasting element too. So Class 1A versus Class 1B in this episode, and it looks like next episode, they're just like, match 3 conclusion, next episode. So we're just doing basically 2 episodes per match, probably. I like that these characters, with the exception of Tetsu, Shoto, and Ida, these characters don't have powers that really stand out, or they're kind of just normal-ish quirks. They're not anything extreme. Like Ponies is just to shoot horns, which turns out to be pretty effective. Kabara, I thought Kabara was the welding guy, but he's not. His is just to spin his arms and gyrate them. Honanuki is to make things soft, which is a really good power, actually. That's manipulating any type of ground or element is a really strong ability, so that's pretty good. And then obviously Tetsu is just raw power force. He's their version of Kirishima, pretty much. But then you have Shoto and Ida, whose powers are pretty standoutish, and then Ojiro and Shoji are just, they're very traditional, like normal-ish quirks. So that makes it interesting. And I like that Tetsu, even though he's a dummy, he does have some intuition. He has some instinct to what to do. And Kabara kind of picks up on that as well. But yeah, the idea of legacy and kind of what's on the line with winning these matches. I love that Shoto left him on red. I love it. I love that Endeavor's like, I've been trying to talk to my son. I finally got his phone number, and he's not returning my messages. It's like, Endeavor, you're trying, but you got to remember, I mean, all the flashbacks Shoto had this episode of Endeavor's abuse, Endeavor doesn't seem privy to. He's just like, I don't understand. Shoto's growing up. Why can't he depend on me? And it's like, oh, buddy, you got some stuff to work through still. But that's really interesting. And then at the end, we get Ida's whole thing about the idea of ripping your quirk out of your body and it regrowing is kind of terrifying. And I like that they tell him, they're like, this is going to cause a lot of pain and you've got to be mature enough for it to work. But if you rip it out and tune it and train, it's going to come back stronger. So I'm like, that's cool, but that's terrifying. And if you notice in the episode, Ida kind of does it alone. He's like sitting out in the woods and has the scarf in his mouth so he doesn't cry out. And it's like, oh, that's like gruesome. Like the idea of hurting your body to make it stronger. Again, a contrast to Shoto and Endeavor training. Endeavor's like, you need to build up your constitution. You need to build up strength to be able to do this move. And he's forcing Shoto to do it. And Shoto's like, clearly not liking it because he's crying. Whereas you have Ida voluntarily hurting himself to make himself stronger. So that contrast is really cool too. The parallels between Ida and Shoto this episode were really neat. And I think that that's very intentional on Horikoshi's part because Horikoshi had them fighting Stain together back in season 2. So these characters have been intertwined for a long time, and Horikoshi is like slowly fleshing that out. And there's a lot of callbacks so far this season, to season 2 specifically. A lot of callbacks. And it's not just the fact that we're doing it in like a battle style structure like we did in season 2, but there's callbacks to characters working together, like Stain and Shoto working together. There are callbacks to Bakugo and Deku and their relationship. There's callbacks to Aizawa and how he's viewing the kids working together. There's callbacks to Class 1B. There's callbacks to Endeavor and the background and the whole legacy. I mean, Ingenium's whole thing was season 2 as well. So there's a lot of things that were brought up in season 2 that are now getting expanded upon at the start of season 5, which I think is really neat that it's not like some anime. I feel like when you get to the point of you're in like the 5th or 6th season of something, like it's been going on long enough, it can become a thing where sometimes the anime forgets about its past. It forgets about things that happened in the past, and so when something happens, you're like, where the heck did this come from? But Horikoshi, with his storytelling, does a really good job of connecting things that happened 100 chapters ago that you were like, oh yeah, like all comes back around and comes full circle. So I really like that. But yeah, so despite it being just a normal match, I really liked this episode because of everything that it's setting up. I think it's that the show is doing a good job of taking characters that we've known for 5 seasons now, showing how they've improved and that they have grown, and then building off of that. Like I like that a lot. So I liked it. I like this episode a lot. It's pretty good. And we're going to conclude it next episode. So I'm like, dude, you could have thought of a better title, but okay. But yeah, I've got some things to talk about in spoilers that I want to bring up, but if you're not here for spoilers, that's okay. So in the meantime, I really liked this episode. I'm excited for episode 8 next week. We shall see. So if you're not sticking around for spoilers, thank you for watching. Stay safe, have a great week, and I'll be back next week with episode 8. For those of you sticking around for spoilers, like I said in the main discussion, there's a lot of setup and foreshadowing in this episode. A lot. And I hadn't gone back and reread the manga until now. And so seeing this episode play out, I'm like, oh wow, we were building things up 100 chapters in advance, as per Horikoshi usual. So there's a lot of things going on in this episode. We did get a little bit extra. We did chapters 202, 203, and the first 4 pages of chapter 204. So a little bit more content this episode, which we didn't really do a big recap. So that was good. I appreciated not the big recap, just like the first minute of the episode. Oh, Toya. Man, at this point in the manga where I'm at now, Horikoshi. What I love about the Toya reveal is that it has been so obvious this entire time since season 3, since the moment that Dabi's power, the moment that Dabi's quirk was revealed, people were speculating, right? People were speculating the moment Dabi's quirk was revealed of being the blue flames. People were like, interesting. We'll put 2 and 2 together. But maybe not. I don't know. And then later on in season 3, when Dabi snatches Bakugo's marble, the marble with Bakugo in it, out of Shoto's hands and was like, too bad for you, Shoto Todoroki. People were like, could they be related? And that was like the inklings. And then as the show has gone on, it just becomes more and more apparent. But you know what? I love it because a lot of times mangaka will be like, no, there's what a reveal, what a surprise. Didn't you know that was his brother all along? But with Horikoshi, it's so obvious from the start that it's just like Horikoshi's teasing us. He's just teasing us. He's like, I don't know. Here's some information. Maybe they're related. Who knows? And it's like, they clearly are. And of course, if you've read the manga, you know, Dabi's the brother. Dabi is Toya. But this chapter, I remember people having a field day with chapter 202 because Endeavor was like, Toya came close. His fire's greater than mine, but he has raised constitution. So we find out that what that means is that Toya has Endeavor's quirk amped up, but his body is suited to handling ice. It's not suited to handling fire. So that's why he burns himself. That's why Dabi has all the burns, because his body is not suited to handle fire. If he had an ice quirk, he would have been perfect. And that's going to build up and come out later this season when we have Dabi versus Getten, because Getten is an ice quirk user and Dabi isn't really affected by him because his body's suited to handling ice. Because he's Toya Todoroki. So all this stuff that it's like Horikoshi is planting all of these obvious seeds and all these obvious dots, and he's like, okay, fandom, connect them, because then it's going to be a lot of fun when we do the actual reveal to these characters. When these characters find out the truth, you all will already know, and it'll be really, really fun. And it does end up being really fun. I cannot express in words how excited I am for the war arc and when we get Dabi's reveal. Dabi's dance, when we get to that point in the anime, I hope they do it justice, because it is so awesome. The come dance with your son in hell endeavor. And it's like, I love it. I love it so much. So yeah, that setup here was a bit obvious. And I'm curious, I'm sure that reactors, everybody at this point knows that Dabi's Toya. Everyone knows at this point. But I'm going to be really excited to see people react to that line from Endeavor, because it's going to be like, yeah, you know, we all know at this point. It's just a matter of time. And Horikoshi takes his sweet time revealing it to us. He just takes his time and is like, I'll just do it whenever. And then when he does do it, the fandom's going to be like, it's here. The time is here. So, yeah. The whole thing with Ida understanding Shoto's feelings, because he can kind of read Shoto and gets that something's up with him. I really like that they point that out. And Tetsu, God, just being such a ham. So I'm going through this manga to make sure Endeavor on Red is just wonderful. He's like, Shoto, and they're like, his Shoto sickness is getting worse by the day. And we find out later that the Endeavor, for all his flaws, and he has a lot of flaws, a lot of serious flaws, he wasn't always a terrible parent, but a lot of things corrupted him and made him a terrible parent. And so he's trying to backtrack and trying to atone and trying to build this relationship, but it's not easy, and it's not something that you can just build. The fact that Shoto even read his text, I think, is a sign of progress. Because Endeavor is trying, but it's like, dude, you've caused a lot of damage. That's a lot of damage. You can't just fix that in a text message. Mm-mm. And I'm excited for us to get later on down the road with more of the keeping up with the Todoroki drama, because Endeavor is trying to realize that, I've done so much damage myself. I've done so much collateral damage. I don't know. I might need to step away and let it fix itself. Sort of situation. Not fix itself, but he's like, I may need to step away before I cause more. Kind of it's an interesting parallel to this episode, because as a hero, Endeavor causes very little damage. He gets the job done quickly and succinctly and with minimal causality and collateral. But as a father, he causes a lot of damage. And so it's a big parallel of his home life versus his hero life, which is very intentional by Horikoshi. I forgot all about the Sandman, his ability. I forgot all about it. So that's a really cool thing. And I do remember that that Class 1A, now that I'm thinking about it, Class 1A loses this battle. Shoto loses this battle because he basically immobilizes all of them, which is interesting. I feel like it's important that Shoto loses so many battles. Like, Hawks jokes about it in last season. He was like, I was going to take on your son, but then he failed the licensing exam, so it seemed like a bad mark against Endeavor. It's a good thing that Shoto fails, because Shoto's father has been built up to being this end-all, be-all hero that is so successful that I think it's important that Shoto remains humble enough to know his faults and knows the growth that he has to do. So I really appreciate that. If he was OP like Bakugo, like, his head would be so inflated. Could you imagine if Bakugo was Endeavor's kid? Like, the head on that boy? Like, the inflation of ego? Like, oh my gosh. So it's good that Shoto has these humbling moments, because I think that makes him stronger in the long run and makes him more prone to think about things in a different way. So yeah, there's not too much else. The manga and anime are pretty much succinct. There's not anything really missing from it. I forgot Pony was an exchange student. Apparently some people ship Monoma with her. I don't see it, but maybe I need to go back and reread the manga, because I was like, she probably would put up with all of his junk. So who knows? So yeah, there's not a whole lot left after this. At the end of this chapter, just the thing with Ida and everything. But yeah, I forgot that they actually end up losing this battle. And then I'm trying to remember. I think that means that Bakugo's group wins, because then it's tied. And then we get to Deku. And they do a really good job of foreshadowing that Deku's thing with Shinso is going to be a thing. And it is. Whenever people on Crunchyroll were like, this season's boring so far, and it's meh, I'm like, oh, guys. Which, honestly, I don't think it's boring. I think here's the problem. And Horikoshi doesn't care. Horikoshi, the mangaka, is like, I'm telling the story the way I want to tell it. If y'all don't like it, shove it. And so, Horikoshi has no qualms. He does not care. But here's the thing. With this series, Season 1 and Season 2 were great because it just built off of each other. And then once Season 3 happened, everything started going off the rails. Like with All for One versus One for All, with Bakugo versus Deku, and then Overhaul comes in. And I really liked Season 4 because Overhaul introduces this very dark element to My Hero Academia. This idea that there's this seedy underbelly, that these villains are not just robbing banks, but they're murdering people, they're abusing people, they're causing a lot of serious damage that has long-lasting repercussions. And so I think, and Season 4 delves into that. It also delves into the idea of being a hero with gentle criminal and kind of the downside and dark aspects of hero society in terms of that. And then you have, Endeavor and the No Moon, everything. So it was a much darker season. Season 4 was. And then you start out Season 5 and it's this happy battle between Class 1 and Class 1A and Class 1B. And so everybody's like, well, we had all this dark aspects. Now we're going back to happy stuff. And I'm like, savor this. Because once Deku's battle with Shinso is over, it's going to get dark. And I know I keep saying that, and people are going to be like, oh, is it? Shigaraki's backstory is like one of the darkest things in this series. It's the idea that he murdered his entire family and didn't really even know that he did it, and that All for One was like, time to use this to my advantage. It's pretty dark, and I don't know how uncensored this show is going to be with it, because like his family basically falls apart and decays in front of him, and that's in the manga. It is very grotesque. Like Horikoshi spares no expense showing like his family falling apart on the pages, and I may have to do a side-by-side comparison of that when we get to it, because it's pretty gruesome. I don't think the show will go that far, but to show that, because it's pretty disgusting. But yeah, it does get darker. And the second half of the season, I feel, is gonna pick up the pace. But again, pacing in My Hero Academia can be all over the place, because Horikoshi, one thing I admire about Horikoshi is that he does not create his manga to tailor an anime format. I feel like some mangaka and some anime, especially with shonen, their manga is kind of tailored for adaptation. Does that make sense? It tailors itself to be adapted. So the highs and lows and the arcs in the manga flow and fit for an anime format. Whereas mangaka, I feel like, specifically Horikoshi and Geiji, who does Jujutsu Kaisen. I've not read Jujutsu Kaisen's manga, but just based on season 1 of the anime, it seems like it's not tailoring itself. It's doing the same thing. And I've heard that Horikoshi and the creator of Jujutsu Kaisen are friends, and I'm like, of course you both are, because they're like my favorite shonen right now. Of course you both are, because their stories are just similar in terms of kind of tone and not necessarily style, but just the feel of them is kind of similar. And so we shall see, y'all. But I'm really excited. Like, this episode, the foreshadowing it's done has me really excited for the future. So I'm curious to see where all that goes. But in any case, I'm curious to know your thoughts on the episode. If you have spoilers, please tag them down below so we don't spoil any anime only people. But yeah, I'm looking forward to next episode. It should be a lot of fun. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll be back next week with episode 8 of season 5 of My Hero Academia. Bye.